Et Bobette danse avec moi. Ce soir on fait dodo. Danse avec moi, ma bébête, under a stormy sky. Et papa, il a vendu la terre et la vache. Danse avec moi, ma bébête, under a stormy sky. Jean-Paul, il joue le violon, la belle accordéon. Danse avec moi, ma bébête, under a stormy sky.
In southern Ontario, Canada, near the Niagara Escarpment in Burlington, Ontario, is one of the most scenic roads in the area, Snake Road. It was here, along Snake Road, that Bob Lanois planted his roots in 1988. With his own hands and inventiveness, Bob designed and built his own cabin, the shack as he called it. Bob wanted to be close to nature, and he kept the land as natural as possible. It was important to Bob to be away from the noise, clutter, and distraction, and to have a place where he could be himself, where he could work and be creative. My name is Dave Conlon. I'm a Canadian photographer and filmmaker, and my passion is discovering and exploring abandoned buildings. I run the website Freaktography.com. In the fall of 2021, I learned of a seemingly abandoned cabin in the woods, and after finding out that it and its owner are a major part of local and Canadian music history, I decided to dig deeper and get the whole story. This story inspired me to shoot and produce my first full-length feature documentary film, and to tell the story of Bob Lanois, what led him to move into this small remote cabin, and the amazing music, art, and creativity that came from it. Robert Jacques Lanois, known to most as Bob Lanois, was born in Gatineau, Quebec on April 4th, 1948. His parents were Jill and Guy Lanois. Bob was the eldest of 4 siblings, Daniel, Ronald, and Jocelyn. In 1961, when their parents' marriage ended, Bob, Daniel, Ronald, and Jocelyn moved to Hamilton, Ontario with their mother. The Lanois family settled in a family home on Robina Road in Ancaster, Ontario, and that is where this story begins.
But, I would encourage you all to just go ahead and keep up your work. Put stuff together and show it, even if it's YouTube. YouTube's grown up now. We don't know where that's going. It's very encouraging. You may have to do it just for the love of it, which is not a bad thing. But please, keep up the work. Put together documentaries. Put something really nice together and get it up and seen by people. Thank you all. Now, let's go bravely. We have a lot of work to do.
Bob was the lesser known of the Lanois brothers, moved from Quebec to Hamilton in his teens with Daniel. And they started recording local bands in their mother's basement. And eventually they went on to establish Grant Avenue Studios, which was one of the most important recording studios in Southern Ontario for a very long time. And a lot of artists went through this studio. This is where Daniel Lanois really cut his chops as a producer. And he ended up working with people like Emmylou Harris and Bob Dylan and Peter Gabriel and U2 as a result of the work that he had done with his brother, Bob, at Grant Avenue.
Far from his lair, on a long and bloody night, he is drawn to the music coming from a circus caravan. As the wagons approach, the sound of reeds grips his desperate heart. And in a moment of self-doubt, he longs to be in that world. He knows this cannot be. Yet he saunters forward. From his perch, the musician, now aware of this attention, allows his harmonica to tumble in a flash of silver into the vampire's awaiting hands.
While Bob Lanois had many good friends and loved ones, it was his brother Daniel Lanois who I thought was best to help me tell this story. Daniel was kind enough to take time from his busy schedule to speak with me at great length about his brother.
I'm Daniel Lanois. I'm a record maker. I've been making records since I was a kid. I started when I was 12, and my brother Bob stood by me for a good 18 years, and we grew together making records. Well, music started for me in Quebec. My dad played a bit of violin. My grandfather was pretty good on the violin. And on my mom's side, we had uncles that sang. So there were a lot of old Quebec songs, a lot of them funny songs.
We were a couple of little rebels who loved music and had heard a lot of music in our background, although I didn't realize that till later on. But there was a lot of music there and a lot of art.
We got to hear a lot of the jigs, a lot of the laughter, a lot of the singing at people's houses, and that was a big part of the music that I was exposed to as a child. And then my mom relocated the family to Hamilton because her brother was a bartender in Hamilton. He had got things going with work and lived in a rooming house and was able to provide an apartment for us in the back of this rooming house. I took a liking to the clarinet, something I'd seen on TV, but I couldn't afford a clarinet, but I managed to muster up $1 to purchase a plastic penny whistle. And I loved that little whistle, and I played it, made everybody crazy, I'm sure.
And Dan was always a fantastic musician from day one, and so that was very helpful. Great musical ear. And I knew that about him right from the beginning.
But all along, my brother was more technologically driven, so he always had an interest in electronics and what we call a breadboard. A breadboard is an open face circuitry that you play around with to find your way to a design. I was interested in the electronic part of things, but I didn't have his talent. So he was always pushing the envelope of electronics, and I was pushing the envelope of my music. So we grew up in tandem that way. And then eventually I acquired a little flea market tape recorder, and I started recording my own music, and then some friends from the neighborhood would come over to the house, and that's how the studio thing got started. Bob was not there the very beginning of the recording studio. It was Bob Doidge and I that started the first studio while Bob was traveling in India. He was going through a time of development spiritually and studying meditation and so on. So he went to India to continue with that. And when he came back, I already had the recording studio set up with Bob Doidge. And that's when my brother Bob took an interest in what I was doing. And he applied his technological knowledge and skills to that. And we started building and expanding on the recording studio. So that's roughly the lay of the land of it.
Looking into the artists and bands that Bob and Daniel Lanois recorded and engineered in the basement of their mother's house, I discovered that there were hundreds of bands who came through Master Sound Recordings, also known as MSR Studio, including an album featuring my very own uncle Mike Gardner playing bass for the original Sloth Band in 1975. However, it was the story of one album specifically that caught my attention. Cyborgs Revisited by Hamilton, Ontario act Simply Saucer. Cyborgs Revisited came to be regarded as a lost classic of Canadian music, frequently being named as one of the greatest Canadian albums of all time.
Okay, Simply Saucer are a Hamilton, Ontario-based band that was formed in 1973. All of us were avid record collectors. We met at a downtown Hamilton record store called Bob Moody's. We were collecting cult artists like Sun Ra, German bands like Can and Faust. It was through our manager Rick Bissell that we first met Bob Lanois. Yeah, I just remember a very serious session. Dan was in and out. There were times that I remember him cupping his hands over his head. I don't know if he was shocked, disgusted, or or what. But it was mainly Bob's thing. Yeah, my memory is Bob was very serious, a very serious guy. In the studio, we were cocky. We were green. But the sound that we brought to Master Sound Studio, I would say it was fully realized. It was what we wanted. We actually were obsessive in terms of rehearsals and that. And, Bob just took it nonplussed. He just set everything up and recorded us raw, live off the floor. Did a fantastic job.
Yeah, my brother was very inventive and resourceful with technology, as I was with music, and we decided that we would build this recording studio, and we had never worked in a recording studio. I had this kind of exchange with my brother, and we decided that we would look towards what we heard about in Detroit with Motown, that they had what let's call house sound, and so they had the drum kit nailed to the floor, so we nailed our drum kit to the floor, and then we had a house bass sound. We had nice instruments, and we developed house sound together, so people could walk in and get instant gratification from our setups, from our preparations. Grant Avenue Studio is largely my brother Bob's accomplishment. It took a couple of years to build that place, and I carried on working in the basement while in the original studio, while my brother Bob built Grant Avenue. And so it was, that transition wouldn't have been possible if he had not been willing to go down there and through blood, sweat, and tears, and by demolition and by rebuilding, build a beautiful place. And I think people really felt the love and the attention to detail that he put into that place. And that's why we had such a loyal clientele, that people felt as though they were in a place that was built by love.
I had heard the buzz over the years about Grant Avenue Studio, and through speaking with friends of Bob and the praise that Daniel gives him for building this studio, I had to see it for myself. In fact, I'm recording my narration for this video right now at Grant Avenue Studio with Bob Doidge at the controls.
I'm Bob Doidge, and I own this place, the place that Bob built. How I met Bob Lanois was I became friends with Dan Lanois in probably about grade 10, and we joined a band together, and we were in a folk group at school, etc. And I started hanging around the house, and we were playing music down in his basement, and Bob was there. He was the older brother, and I knew him from there. And eventually, when the studio got going in the basement, then I saw a lot of them.
Great. So you guys have been friends with Lanois brothers your entire life, basically.
Yeah, and my younger brother was best friends with their younger brother, Ron.
Right, okay.
Who was the chef.
So tell me about how Grant Studios came to be, and really Bob's, what did he do here?
Well, it was the brothers who owned it, and they were looking for a new location to expand. And at one point it was, maybe go to Toronto, and everybody agreed, we don't want to spend our lives in a car, so let's just stay in Hamilton. So they looked at different locations, eventually came up with this, which was a house that someone had converted into an office temporarily, but it still had the remaining walls. Bob took over about a year of his time and gutted this whole floor and created this whole thing. Like, he designed every square inch of it, and he had never been in a studio before. That was the hilarious part of it. And he got everything not only right, it's actually perfection. Like, even when he was having all of this installed, he decided to go with really extra inputs so that we wouldn't run out in time. Well, I still am not out But I think the coolest story when it comes to this, because it is I think I mentioned it before, is the most unnoticed part, is people comment on these walls sometimes and how lovely they are. Well, they're cork bark, and he picked this to put on the wall. But this is Bob Lanois in a nutshell. When it comes to you get a 1-foot tile with 9 squares in it.
Right.
Well, he started putting them up and found them very distracting. So he stopped and he went to the library and spent a few days studying abstract. And what it does when you have confronted or are looking at something with linear walls, etc., your eyes become drawn to it. But with abstract, you don't see it, you look past it. So what he did is he came back here and he got a table with a T-square on it, and he took all of these tiles and randomly cut them with a skill knife.
Right.
And broke them all into little pieces. And he started over there and started working his way around. And this whole thing is done one piece at a time. And that's Bob Lanois in a nutshell. He came up with this concept, studied it, and then came in here and did it. And it's probably the most unnoticed, which was his intention, part of the building is, you know, it's just there.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Right.
We had been in recording for a long time by the mid-'80s. And it was, probably we had 15 years of recording under our belts. And I went for a sailboat trip with Bob in the Caribbean. And we were on one of these lovely little islands called Les Saintes. And on the island of Les Saintes, he said to me that he was tired. He didn't want to be chasing these dreams anymore, that he wanted to have his feet on the ground and find something for himself that didn't live out there in the stars. And I said to him, well, Bob, you got to follow your inner voice on this. And I felt that I was just getting started, and I wasn't about to stop chasing the impossible. And so we decided to bring Grant Avenue Studio to an end as we knew it. And my good friend Bob Doidge, he took it on and has carried on with it to this day. And so I think it's fair to say that the chapter of the early days and, you know, the wide-eyed discoveries that we made, from the breadboards to the development of the music to embracing house sound, it had pretty much realized itself by around 1984, 85.
Right.
And that ran in tandem with my leaving Canada. I left Canada in 1983. And I think that we shook hands on the closing of a chapter, and Bob wanted to venture off into his own world as his artistic inclinations. You know, he wanted to follow his own heart, and so that's it. We went our separate ways to a degree. We were always brothers, of course, so you can never be separated. But we felt that we had done what we needed to do with our time together at that location, and we got out while we still held the heavyweight belt.
Right.
I believe my brother wanted to have his feet on the ground, as I mentioned earlier, and
Yeah.
that also meant that he wanted to build his own house
Mhm.
and live in it. We were a family that was always on the go. We probably had 3 or 4 different locations in Hamilton as my mom was trying to make ends meet, as 'cause you're a single mom with 4 kids and no help from daddy-o. You can just imagine the financial
Yeah.
pressures. And so we'd hop from one apartment to another. And I think there was just something inside Bob that told him that one day he would stop the running and be planted in a place where he could evolve with his ideas, with his philosophical way of looking at life.
Mhm.
And which is why he never wanted to let go of it. And I'm glad he kept it right to the end. Um, he wanted he wanted privacy, and he wanted to be with nature, and he wanted to feel some of what he remembered from some of the old timers that we knew back in Quebec. They were the Breau brothers, 3 of them, around Lac Saint Clair.
Okay.
And the Breau brothers all live in their own log cabins. Their structures were very strong, so whenever there were big storms and we needed shelter, we'd go and visit one of the Breaux and stay the night. And they were full of stories, and they had no refrigeration or electricity, and they made ends meet, and they were really some of the pioneers of that area. And I think that the Breau brothers really made an impression on Bob, and that way of life and that simplicity, uh, essentially against the grain of technology. And I think there was always something in Bob that wanted to feel what it was like in those days in Quebec with the Breau brothers.
Ma jolie, how do you do? Mon nom est Jean-Guy Thibault-Ledoux. I come from east of Gatineau. My name is Jean-Guy, ma jolie. J'ai une maison à la fontaine where we can live if you marry me. Une belle maison à la fontaine where we will live, you and me. Oh, Louise, ma jolie Louise.
The shack location was always a reset button for me, just to see how my brother lived. We were very close. We came up together, very, very close. And when I went to work abroad, I had to leave all that behind. But he went deeper into it. And so, as the traveling one of the two, when I came back to Hamilton and visited the shack, it was a reminder about the values that Bob always operated by, and the sacrifice that I made to leave that kind of life behind myself, because I could have gone that way myself. But I knew that we were on 2 different journeys, and that I knew that I still had something to say as a record maker. I was very excited about the art form and its potential, and Bob was very excited about being rooted and have more of an understanding of where he came from. And he wasn't interested in evolving beyond that in terms of acquisition or building an empire in some urban environment. He was very happy to be in that place where he could see the deer wander, and he could befriend that woodpecker. I made a record with my brother Bob, and we titled it Snake Road. And given that we have an interest in the cabin at Snake Road, then it deserves to be talked about. Bob was a good harmonica player, but had never made a record. I said to him, let me bring my international skills to Snake Road. And we agreed to do 1 song per session, and that became the record. The Snake Road record has some of my debut piano playing on it. My little gift to my brother.
Bob Lanois, Snake Road.
Bob collected several awards over the years. In 2007, Mohawk College presented him with an honorary award. In 2008, he was nominated for Instrumental of the Year at the Juno Awards for Snake Road. In addition, he had several nominations and wins at the Hamilton Music Awards.
What a thrill.
In researching this documentary and familiarizing myself with the work of the Lanois brothers, I noticed a theme of collaboration on several projects, from artists such as Emmylou Harris on her 18th studio album, Wrecking Ball. Bob's name also appears on the liner notes for U2's The Joshua Tree, the 1987 Grammy Album of the Year produced by Daniel, as well as work with the Tragically Hip, who had also worked with Daniel Lanois. I wanted to find out from Daniel, what did Bob bring to the table to get him invited in on so many great projects?
Bob always had a much better eye than myself. He was more visually driven and was very handy with cameras. He was always really great at taking pictures. And I invited him to come with me and work with Emmylou Harris, as you mentioned. And he made, he took some lovely stills with her, but also made a nice documentary about the process of the making of her record called Wrecking Ball.
Hi, Abby.
Hey, Bob.
So do you think we've got some pictures?
I love these pictures. Yeah. Yeah, they look good. Easiest photo session I ever did.
His very advanced eye and his capacity to notice special moments allowed him to capture the kind of thing that is hard to capture as a filmmaker. But you're a filmmaker yourself. You know that being at the right place at the right time and having an understanding of or being the fly on the wall can go a long way. So Bob had a lovely talent for blending in, and everybody loved him. And so he immediately became part of the family of any given project that he stepped into. And so the Emmylou Harris documentary is one of those. Tragically Hip, that evolved through his own contacts. And I know that Gordani really loved Bob and saw him as a great artist. And they did a lot of lovely things together in my absence, because I was working in Europe at the time. So I can't take any credit for any of that kind of matchmaking. So you'll have to talk to the Hip about that.
My name is Paul Langlois, and I play with the Tragically Hip. Gord Downey and I were living in Toronto, and so when we first met him, we went out to his cabin and just had a tea, I think. And at the time, you know, I'm not sure what year it was. Well, we were about to do Grace 2, so it was probably 95. He hadn't, wasn't up and running as a studio yet, just a teeny little cabin. And he did have like instruments around and stuff. So maybe he had been recording, but it kind of wasn't like an official studio. Yeah, I liked him. He was a very unique person. He had ideas, and he wanted to, we have a studio called the Bathhouse, and he wanted to do the video down there with us in our recording environment. Pretty artsy guy, you know. I mean, he knew what he was doing. He was playing with a lot of shadows and lights, and you know, it was pretty ethereal, atmospheric sort of treatment. Yeah, so it kind of speaks for himself, just that he did have a sense of certainly artistic style, but also like abstract ish treatment. Yeah, so we decided to do our next video with him, which was Greasy Jungle, and that was done more at his cabin, and I would say less artsy, whole different sort of ball game, like sort of through the brush, and you know, it's little kind of overexposed kind of treatment. So I would have gone there one other time to discuss Greasy Jungle with Gord and Bob. But then Gord Downey ended up visiting with him like here and there because he was in Toronto and Bob just outside of Burlington. Yeah, so he was, we all liked him and working with him was a good experience. And then Gord ended up to see him here and there over the years.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that Margot told me, Bob's partner, is that Gord had been to the shack a number of times, and also after his motorcycle accident, Gord would go to visit him in his recovery quite often.
Yeah, Gord, very loyal person with any friend that he has, and Gord was just like that. He would certainly, if someone's in recovery after an accident, that doesn't surprise me at all. I didn't know that, but it doesn't surprise me at all.
One of the things that Daniel Lanois is most widely known for is his work with U2, specifically his work on The Unforgettable Fire and the Grammy-winning album The Joshua Tree, as well as other U2 albums. When reading the liner notes on the back of The Joshua Tree, you'll find the name Bob Lanois under the thanks section. However, no one could tell me what Bob's contribution was to earn him eternal gratitude, forever etched onto the back of one of the greatest rock albums of all time. Since Bono or The Edge were not available, I went to the next best thing, Bob's brother Daniel.
Well, let's go back a little bit earlier than that to The Unforgettable Fire, which is the first record I worked on with U2. We recorded in a castle, and we used a very nice system from New York called the FNL system. And it was one of the first transportable recording rigs. But when I got to Slane Castle, is where we were recording, I realized that the FNL system did not include some of the nice Neve microphone preamps that I was accustomed to using with Bob back in Hamilton. So I put a call into Bob and I said, would you please rack up a dozen Neve preamps for me and bring them out? And so he was able to facilitate that request and made it so that we now had the very best microphone preamps for certain applications like vocals for sure, drum sounds, and bass sounds. So that was the beginning of his relationship with U2 through me by invitation. And I think that's built into the Joshua Tree, again, facilitating technological tricks that we were, the breadboards had expanded considerably by then. And so he was able to help me out so I could bring some of our Hamilton technology to Ireland.
Bob bought the shack property in 1988, but had been looking at it since 1986. There was already a tiny shed there, but he built onto it and turned it into a much larger place. He designed it himself and built it with his own hands with the help of some friends. Bob lived in this shack almost full-time from 1990 onwards. He wanted to be close to nature and keep the land as natural as possible. Bob Lanois was a curious and inquisitive person, always questioning and searching for new and alternative approaches to things. He was self-educated, and conventional school did not interest him. When something wasn't working for him, he would simply learn how to fix it. At some point, Bob decided to turn his shack in the woods into his very own recording studio, where he could invent new recording technology, invite singers and bands to record, and make music with Bob at the controls. Bob ended up with a fully operational recording studio in the shack. In 2004, he had a whole 8-piece band from Peterborough called the Silver Hearts at the shack, recording their album, Our Precious City. The whole 8-member group stayed at the shack for a week. Bob rented camper trailers and porta potties. They managed to get a great record done under ridiculously cramped conditions. Many bands and artists recorded at the shack over the years. One of them was a close friend of Bob's named Rachel Hart. She met me at the shack to tell me about that experience.
My name is Rachel Hart, and I'm a musician, singer-songwriter, and I had the pleasure to work with Bob in the early 2000s. I came to know Bob, as I was mentioning, in the early 2000s. He's a friend of my husband, Will McCauley, and that was the connection there. So they're a bunch of musicians, ragtag musicians in Hamilton, and drawn to, you know, the Grand Avenue studio, and had done some recording there with some other people, and, you know, just getting to know one another in musical events and stuff like that. So
I'd love to hear about the experience of recording in here and what it's like having Bob as your sound engineer.
Yeah, so more than sound engineer, he was basically like a sorcerer. Bob was very close to the elements. He lived here close to the elements by choice. He kind of helped us to learn how to cultivate presence, you know, by being activated by the elements, but also in the presence of one another. Right. So I feel like that is truly how the album came to be. This is for Bob. Little red fox came today with the swish of his tail, he ran away. Before he ran, he gave me a wink. Man, the little red fox, he made me think. What's your medicine? What's your medicine? What's your medicine? What's your medicine?
When I started the process of getting approvals and doing research for this documentary, Tom Wilson was instrumental in making that happen. Having been close friends and collaborators for over 30 years, Tom has been a wealth of knowledge and a great help to me in this process. In 2005, Bob and Tom recorded the Shack Recordings Volume 1, a fantastic collection of songs performed by Tom and Bob, all recorded and produced by Bob Lanois. Tom and I met at the Shack to discuss the recording of that album and many other things.
My name is Tom Wilson, Deo Hahake. I'm working to be an artist one day. I met Bob. He was one of two skinny French-Canadian kids with giant afros and bell-bottoms selling LSD out in front of the Woolworths on King Street across from Gore Park in Hamilton. The Shack sessions were inspired by a burning desire to break down the production and the approach to a song and to actually pay attention to the song rather than all the stuff that goes around it, right? I wanted to make, and Bob wanted to make, a true folk recording, almost a field recording. Mm-hmm. And it was almost a field recording if it wasn't for the Shack surrounding us. Bob had a true belief in me that no one else ever had. Bob was a guy that truly believed in me. He thought that I deserved to be in a league outside of the league that I was in. He thought that I was worthy of his time and his attention, although he didn't agree with me 100% on everything that I did. He was a guy that would inspire me. Mm-hmm. He's also a guy that would give me a good hard kick in the ass when he thought I needed it. And he thought I needed it a lot because his dedication to creating music, his dedication to visual art, his dedication to film, whatever it was that he was engaging in, you got all of him. If Bob gives all, he expects you to give all. Right. And if you don't give all, then he might have to tune you up a little bit, get you ready to give all. And the bar that Bob and Dan raised was pretty unattainable to most people.
Right.
Bob being an absolute genius and a caretaker of the art that we were creating. Bob, working with Bob in this space was definitely a journey, a drive out here that you took that you didn't know if you're going to actually make it home again, and that's mentally or physically. You know, once you got into Bob's web, there was it raised a lot of doubt whether you could ever leave that web. In fact, I'm going to tell you right now, the influence that Bob had on me is still with me.
Good.
It's still with me when I wake up in the morning. He and his brother instilled a work ethic in me without shaking their finger at me.
Right.
They weren't like a mom or a dad, or even an older brother, maybe an older brother. But they definitely instilled a work ethic in me, and that's what I talk about, an unattainable bar of not only excellence in the work that they do, but also in the intent and the strength of their commitment. Sun goes down and the lights come on. Commuter trains are leaving through the backyards of factories, past kitchen windows with families. So come on, baby, let's take a trip. Leave tonight for the young street strip. Dream all night and watch the big wheel spin. Come on, girl, let your old star in.
On the night of Thursday, August 4th, 2011, tragedy struck when Bob struck a deer with his motorcycle on Highway 6 near Hagersville, Ontario. Bob left the Port Dover area at 7 p.m. Riding along at regular speed, a deer suddenly ran across the road without stopping. It made an attempt to jump over the bike but failed, and the deer hit Bob in the face at full impact. He was only wearing a half helmet with sunglasses and no visor. He instinctively dropped the bike and slid onto the roadside gravel strip. Bob was airlifted by helicopter to the Hamilton General Hospital, where he arrived around 9:30 p.m. He had suffered extensive facial injuries, and the impact caused him a traumatic brain injury. Most of the bones in Bob's face were broken, including his nose and lower jaw. For the rest of his life, Bob suffered pain, and he was never able to use his hands the same way again. Bob's brain injury caused him unrelenting problems in his everyday life. Despite that, Bob still managed to do studio work and be creative, and he also still had some fun, and he kept his sense of humor. Glen Marshall and Bob Lanois were lifelong friends. They met when Bob was running Grant Avenue Studio. This was the start of a lifelong friendship and partnership, ultimately resulting in the two partnering on a business venture at the Bunker and the Mule Spinner at the Cotton Factory in Hamilton, Ontario. So tell me about how you came to meet and be friends with Bob Lanois.
Actually, when I met Bob, I was a little kid. I was 15 years old, something like that. And one of my buddy's sisters knew Bob and said, hey, you got to meet this guy. He's got a recording studio in Hamilton. So, of course, being 15 and in a band, I wanted to meet this guy because he apparently was the guy who had the best studio, and he kind of was hooked up to the industry and all the rest of it. So I think I called Bob possibly once every day for about a year. And he finally agreed to come out to my band's rehearsal space out in York, Ontario. One of the things about him, I was going to just say about, is he always was able to share something interesting about whatever he was doing. He had an incredible focus and a very creative mind. The guy, anything you threw at him would come back way differently than you would have expected, and way better.
Super cool.
Yeah, a very interesting way of looking at the world. He was a true Renaissance man. There's not many Renaissance men left.
Yeah.
You know, he could do it all. Like, so in this case, I remember one particular story where I had just started this new studio. In fact, I moved it from my house, moved it into this church. And I said, Bob, I got a new studio. I want to put a studio in a church. Would you take some pictures for me and help me set the studio up? We got it all in this big church. I'm going to go open concept. He said, no problem. He said, I'll take a picture of your studio. Just bring your guys. Be there early. So showed up at, 8 or 9 in the morning. We proceeded to, for an entire day, move things around. We moved every piece of everything. Almost the entire studio was taken out of the building and then brought back in and placed. And it took a long time. And by the time we were ready to do the shot for the studio promotional photo, Bob said, okay, great, I'm gonna take the shot. So he opens his camera up, he looks through the viewfinder, kind of looks at there, and he goes, okay, I'm almost ready. And he has this bag, and he goes in the back room and he changes, comes back out, and he's wearing black, all head to toe, black hood, like a black hoodie, maybe a balaclava, black everything. Yeah. And he's got a belt with a bunch of flashlights, gels, different colored lights, 3 or 4 different things, and he proceeds he turns off the lights, and then for the next about 45 minutes, he walked around the room with the camera bulb open and painted the room with light.
Wow.
Anyway, so he did this for about 45 minutes. He clicked the thing off, turned the lights on, took his camera and went, took the whole, he did one shot on a roll. He reels it back into the 35 mil can like we would have in those days. He tosses me the thing and says, take that down to the lab. And he mentioned whatever type of processing it needed to be done. It's very specific instructions. Yeah. And I still have the negs. I still have the negs in the photo.
Yeah.
And there's one shot on it.
What can you tell me about Bob Lanois as a person and as a friend?
Well, he was a great friend. He was always there for me, and he helped me really figure out some things when I was young. Mm-hmm. And then he also would share with you the things that you brought to him. So he was able to, for me as a friend, he always would remind me what I did for him.
Nice.
Which is nice. Yeah. And especially when someone's done so much for you.
Right.
It kind of it makes you feel, he was very concerned about how other people felt.
That's
and
great.
He was concerned with how are you doing?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And he had a very kind heart that way, and he was a great listener, even though he could talk your ear off, and you could, once you got him started, you couldn't stop him. But he really could listen. He had a lot of dimension that way. So he could go off on some pretty far-reaching tangents.
Yeah.
But when I say he listened, I mean he really heard when he asked you something. He really heard you. He had a real way of being able to listen into what you were saying.
Good.
And challenge you too, man. There wasn't a minute wouldn't pass by. He would challenge. He would challenge something that he thought was off. We had a lot of laughs. He was a very funny guy. He was great with imitation. He could really imitate something. Or a lot of times we'd get going on some just hilarious pantomimes about some absurd thing.
Yeah.
And then he'd make people laugh. He was a very, very funny guy. And that's something that I don't know if people talked about that, but he was a very, very funny guy.
I'm Jack Syperek. I play bass in the Trews.
John-Angus MacDonald, also in the Trews, play guitar.
Well, we didn't get to know him until it was even after his motorcycle accident, and we had moved into the cotton factory. We were storing all of our equipment there and jamming there every time that we had a chance to get together, and he was working there as well. So that's how we came to meet him. I remember one time we were there, you had your boy there, and he had one of those kalimbas in his hand, and he was showing it to Elliot, like look at the cool noise this makes. And I think he paid a lot of attention to the small things.
Yeah, we were demoing a bunch of new songs at one point, I guess like 2016 or 17, and he and Glen, they had like the old Radar recording system, the early digital recorders, and we did like a bunch of live off the floor, strictly demo stuff. We were trying to take stock of the new material we had, but at that time, he and Glen and Bob both kind of pitched me on the idea of like, well, let's just do a record like this. And I thought it would have been a great idea because it was a cool room, and it's just one of those things that never, like, it was like ships passing in the night. It never came to be, but we did end up doing like a live session at Cotton Factory, and we recorded all the audio. Glen recorded it, and we multi-camera shot it. And Bob ended up, the first time we worked together was Bob ended up editing together a video for our song Time Speeding Up, which was the third single off Civilianaires. The footage itself was kind of stale. Like, unfortunately, like, it was just very clean. And one of the reasons we didn't release it as like a concert movie was like, I just felt like it needed some grit or some edge to it. So I just told Bob to, like, my instructions were, just fuck this up as much as you can. Good. And I think what he did was he put it on TV, and then he filmed the TV. Okay. So if you can check, anybody can check it out. It's on YouTube. The song's called Time Speeding Up. And he made it look really cool and intriguing. I mean, that's the mark of a great artist, is like, whatever he was just going for something, and he was trying, and then you sort of feel it when you watch it.
That's good. So let's talk about the video for I Want to Play. So what made you guys pick Bob to be the janitor?
Well, honestly, there was a lot of serendipity involved in making that video in general, because it was like right at the tail end of, I think like restrictions had just eased, but we were going back into them, and we were like, our drummer Chris had the idea of going to do this in the empty arena. Thought it might speak to the time, speak to the moment we're in. We're like, we're never going to get Cops Coliseum or First Ontario. We're never going to get that. How are we going to get that? But our agent called somebody who called somebody, and they're like, yeah, you guys can use it. It's sitting empty. So we got to use the arena, which was the first kind of serendipitous thing that happened. And then the director very quickly wrote a treatment. Our idea was just to perform. And the director, Marcel, was just like, no, you need something to keep the story moving. It needs some kind of, other thing going on. He was right. And he's like, how about, there's this guy who's like, kind of like, you're not supposed to be there. You're breaking in, and he busts you. And we're like, great, now we just need to cast somebody. And I think he just popped into my mind as being like a great character. Like, and again, I didn't want to like insult him by asking him to be like the crazy old janitor either. But I'm like, just as I kind of I hope he took it as a compliment. Like, you can carry a video, if you wanted to. And he showed. I mean, I got to say, like, he showed up. I was really ignorant to his, like, the condition of his health or anything like that. Like, I didn't know him well enough. I hadn't seen him recently enough to really have the full picture. But he did show up. We bought him this crazy janitor outfit at Canadian Tire or whatever. He threw it on, and he like just killed it. Like, the performance was amazing. Like, he needed very little direction. It was just like, okay, now you're gonna just fuck around with the broomstick. And suddenly he's like air guitaring, and he's mopping, and he's checking things off his checklist, like visit to Honolulu, like not gonna happen, all this pandemic stuff. Yeah. And then the best scene of the whole video is when he finally busts the band. That was totally off the cuff as well, because Colin, I think, was edging him on. Our singer was like, yeah, he's like, be really hard on us. Like, go tell us to go fuck ourselves or something. And he's like, I don't want to swear. He's like, I don't want to be that. I don't want to swear. And then they move out. It's like take one, and we just finish playing. And then he pulls off his headphones and goes, what the fuck are you guys doing? And we all burst into laughter, which is 100% organic, not staged laughter, because he did it and he killed us. It was great.
What the fuck are you guys doing here? It's not funny.
So sadly, he was admitted to the hospital very shortly after, I understand, and he passed away on April 19th. and never got to see the video.
No.
Yeah, it breaks my heart, really.
Yeah.
One of the highlights of that day was actually at lunchtime when we took a break, and I guess it would be the last time that we saw him because he left like pretty quickly while we were still filming.
Yeah.
But he was holding court in the dressing room. We were all eating sandwiches, and he was talking about this place a lot.
Good.
He said that there was a canary that used to come down, and he would feed it like out of his hand.
Yeah.
He was like, I was just a little worried that it was getting too friendly or something. But yeah, he was such a sweet man.
The last 10 years of Bob's life were very difficult. Following his motorcycle accident in 2011, his own health declined rapidly. In 2012 and 2014, Bob's longtime partner Margot was dealing with serious health issues. Despite his own health problems, he cared for Margot during this time, getting her to and from appointments, treatment sessions, and more, all while continuing to work. Around 2016, Bob's mother Jill started to develop dementia, and Bob was there for her and helped to look after her until she could no longer live at home. Bob and his mother were very close, and it was devastating to him to watch his mother fade away to this disease. Jill Lanois passed away in October of 2020 during terrible COVID-19 pandemic restrictions. In addition, Bob's mother's partner of 50 years, Nick Monty, had also passed away in 2012, and Bob lost several of his very good friends as well as the family dog Nicky. In Bob's final years, in declining health, he could no longer stay at the shack, and he worked on his music in a small studio he had set up in his home near Hamilton, Ontario. One of Bob's favorite lines right up till the end was, "I'm just getting started." He was excited about things he wanted to do, including modifying his BL99 preamp to improve it. Bob Lanois did not expect to die. After suffering from several ailments and serious conditions for many years, Bob's body could no longer keep up with him. On Wednesday evening, April 14th, Bob collapsed suddenly in great pain on the floor of his home. He was taken by ambulance to St. Joseph's Hospital Emergency in Hamilton, Ontario, where he suddenly slipped into a coma and never came out of it. Bob Lanois passed away on Monday evening, April 19th, 2021, 2 weeks after his 73rd birthday. Bob is remembered as a natural teacher who loved to pass his knowledge on to others. He's also remembered as a very intense man who felt things deeply and passionately. He lived in a spur-of-the-moment way, often saying things like, "Let's just see what happens," and "Let's just wing it." A curious and inquisitive person, Bob questioned everything and always searched for new and alternative approaches to things. Bob loved people, conversations, and discussions, and he was in his element at social events. Bob had a big, loud laugh that came from the heart, and he loved to make other people laugh. Between 2007 and 2009, Bob made 3 trips to Gothenburg, Sweden, to play and tour with his friends in the band Big Is Less, including a 1-week trip to play nightly shows at a club on the island of Bequia. Here is Stephen Sahlin of Big Is Less from Sweden with a beautiful tribute to Bob.
Okay, Bob, here's for you, one of your own many amazing melodies. For you from my shack. Well, you've been here. I'm sure you're floating around here somewhere, listening, enjoying it, I hope. Perhaps picking up a harmonica, playing along. Feel free. And Godspeed, take care, and I'm sure we'll meet again somewhere else.
He taught everybody everything that he knew. That's how giving he was.
Well, his legacy would, right off the top of my head, is there's a studio here that is still running and working and making Gordon Lightfoot records 45 years after he put it together.
You have to understand that if it weren't for Bob, there wouldn't be a Grant Avenue Studios. There wouldn't be this center of musical culture in Hamilton that so many people have availed themselves to over the years. And Bob helped establish Hamilton as a music capital of sorts. And when we lost Bob in April of 2021, we lost a very big part of what Hamilton had become.
Well, there's nobody to replace him. There's nobody living to replace him. And I don't know if there's anybody born yet to replace him.
Yeah. I guess my brother Bob was the only guy I could be around that would, he was the only guy that could keep me quiet at any given sitting, because he always knew better.
He had his own way of living and you know, marched to his own beat, but he obviously had talent.
You know, he liked to believe in others and help others, facilitate others, and you know, in serving one another, that's the best way to bring honor to music and art, and so that it continues on with some longevity. So I think he probably gave that to all of us.
Rather than what's missing, it's what's left. It's what's left, which is Bob Lanois dying. Just meant that the rest of us had to work that much harder to do the very, very best at creating art.
What's the void that is left from Bob's passing?
I will always miss the exchange.
Thank you, everybody.
I love you all.
When this is all over, I will still love you. And when this is all over, I will still be true. And when the sun goes down and you're not around, I will still be here for you. When this is all over, I will still be true. This is all over, I will still love you. And when this is all over, I will still be true. And when the sun goes down and you're not around, I will still be here for you. When this is all over, I will still be true. when this is all over, I will still love you. And when this is all over, I will still be true. And when the sun goes down and you're not around, I will still be here for you. And when this is all over, I will still love you.